the seminar is going to be divided into two parts, really. We're going to start, I'm going to do a little bit of explaining about what exactly we mean by spiritual capital and why we need to nurture it. And then MP is going to go on and talk a little bit about some CPD we've developed, PowerPoints that can be used within a church school. So to start really at the beginning, what do we mean by spiritual capital? Now, the concept of spiritual capital has its roots in the notion of social capital. Now, you may have heard about social capital. It was developed and applied by quite a few key scholars, such as Pierre Bourdieu and Robert Putnam in America. Pierre Bourdieu's work on the concept of capital is the one I'm really going to be pulling on today. And he has the idea of economic, social and cultural capital as the three sort of starter ones. And it's been highly influential and invaluable tool in analysing education systems. Economic capital, I think we're all familiar with. It's visible in, social class inequalities. Social capital, which is where he did a lot of his work. It's about networks. It's about social supportive networks, and it's a little bit about like bonding networks that hold together, but also the importance of bridging networks. Cultural capital, again, is a key thing that it's resources of knowledge, language and appropriation of social relations. Gerald Grace summed that up. It's like what you know, it's access to culture, cultural knowledge, and it's those ties and connections that you are aware of people having. Now, the concept of spiritual capital has its roots in the work of Pierre Bourdieu's concept of religious capital. And I just want to point out the two differences, and they're quite key differences in the way that, we're going to be thinking today. Religious capital for Bourdieu is an issue of power. It's the power between religious specialists and laity, and it's the religious specialists who hold the power. The laity is seen as, what he says, is dispossessed. They're recipients rather than generators, generators of religious capital. And the agency is limited to religious professionals. And Bourdieu talks about them struggling to control access to the goods of salvation, which they allow the laity to have, they allow others to have. And it's very much a power, an enclosed system. And it's understood in organisational terms, institutional terms. Remember Bourdieu's writing in France, it's a Catholic Church he's really talking about. It's about knowledge and competence that sustains the distinction between priest and the laity. In the Christian context, religious capital is generated and held in the hierarchical institution of the church. So within a Catholic context, and you can see us also within the Church of England context, it's that capital that's held, that's really tied tightly to the institution of the church and the institutional structure. Now, spiritual capital as a term has arose out of that and is being developed. I'm going to look a little bit at how it's been defined by Professor Gerald Grace within the Catholic tradition, and then pick up some of the other understandings of it. Now, it's resources. Gerald Grace defined it as resources of faith and values derived from a commitment to a religious tradition. So already it's one step back. It's not being right in the religious tradition, it's that commitment to a religious tradition. Now, Gerald Grace was looking within Catholic schools and within education, and for him it's a source of vocational empowerment. It provides a transcendental awareness that guides judgment and a form of spirituality when life is viewed in terms of relationship with God. So it's a little bit vaguer than the tied religious capital, but it's still, crucially, it's still got that connection. It's got that connection to God, to that transcendental awareness. Those who acquire spiritual capital act as professionals, in their capacity as professionals, act as personal witness to faith, to the spiritual dimension in practice, action, and relationships. And you can see this is where we're going to pick it up in a school context, in a Christian school context. It's that personal witness to faith, and we've added in the spiritual dimension of life in practice, action, and relationships. Move on a little bit. So explaining a little bit, what do we actually mean by the spiritual capital? how distinct it is, that other people have pulled up this distinctiveness. For example, Matthew Guest did some work with looking at the children of bishops and the capital, the transfer of capital in that, and it's a fascinating piece of work. I can't remember the title, but if you email me I can let you have it, about what capital is transferred. And it's not a transference of capital of like church attendance being embedded within the religion. Chris Baker did some work up in Chester on spiritual capital in religious organisations and churches who work in the social sphere. But looking at it within education, here I'm pulling again on Gerald Grace's definition. Our working definition of spiritual capital recognises the agency of the individual. And I think that's key from all the work that we've come through the Nexus, that it's not power residing in one professional, whether it's the clergy or the head teacher, it's the agency of the individual. And Gerald Grace has a wonderful phrase: it's a source of personal power to maintain rather than power over. And I think that's key, that sort of source of power to maintain spiritual capital rather than a source of power over. Gerald Grace extends it from leadership. There's a lot of research into school leadership in spiritual capital, but he argues it resides within the school governing bodies, in classroom teachers, in priests, in school chaplains, and in the parents, and not least in the students themselves. So you can see the whole school, that everybody individual in the school has a contribution to make to the spiritual capital within a school. With its focus on the individual, on the agency of the individual, and a source of personal power, and with looser ties to institutional religion, it reflects that sort of more fluid nature of religion in the 21st century. It's the idea of maintaining and sustaining. And its presence and generations sustains a sense of mission, of purpose, and hope. Now, it's not spiritual capital, Gerald Grace goes on to distinguish from charisma. It's not that idea of exceptional leadership, which we all know about, that sort of exceptional leader who brings it all together. It's a sustaining resource for everyday leadership. So it's really critical for church schools. We're not looking for exceptional leaders. We're not looking for something that's exceptional. It's every day, and it can be in every school. And I think it's really important, that sort of sense of the ties to faith, the ties to the spiritual dimension, without the tight ties to religious institution. It's a move from institutional to personal power, but I really argue quite strongly we don't need to think of it as weaker than religious capital. It can be just seen as different in kind. It's often thought, well, religious capital is the gold standard. This is weaker. This is just a softer version. But I would argue it is different in kind, not a weaker or further down the continuum than religious capital. Moving on to that next slide. It's often seen in that sort of vaguer, I'm spiritual but not religious, but I think from all the work we've done in the Nexus, you know, that is important. It's not to be seen as dismissive. We do not, you know, undervalue people who see themselves as being spiritual because they do have those links, or some of them do have those links to the religious. Drawing here on the work of Mario de Souza, who was a Catholic member of religious order in Canada, and was writing about Catholic education, and he picks up some key ideas which I think are really relevant for spiritual capital. That being spiritual, being religious, is not just about the regular sacramental prayer life, moral and ecclesial dimensions of life, and comes to the idea that it has a focus on human development, that it is not just human development with a few churchy pieces tacked on. But as he says, to use the language of St. Paul, Christian development means progressively becoming a new creation in Christ. And it's that sort of sense of being deeply religious and deeply spiritual without just saying, and I think this is something we'll pick up later, that if you're trying to nurture spiritual capital, it's not about knowing what's the right prayers. When do you say prayers? How do you do a worship? It's something a lot deeper than that. And I think Mario de Souza's understanding of what he's talking about is Catholic education, and I'm saying it's Christian education, encapsulates the nature of what we mean by spiritual capital. Grace, just to put a little bit of a caveat on what I've been saying, though, Gerald Grace's interpretation of spiritual capital is distinct in that it attains that strong links to the religious institution, in his case, Catholic education, the Catholic Church. Other scholars have taken the term spiritual capital and reflected much more weaker links with religion at all. They see it as a more fluid and free-flowing notion. For example, Davis and Guest, who I was talking about before, interpret it as an eclectic appropriation of religious resources chosen and adapted to meet individuals' subjective needs. It's almost going back to your bricolage in person, just pulling together bits of religion that they need. And that's led to one of the major criticisms of it, which I think we can deal with, but it's unlike religious capital, where there's a gold standard where it's held by the religious institution. You know what religious capital is like and where it stands. There is no boundary to the concept of spiritual capital, and it is used and interpreted in a variety of ways, and it can become very wishy-washy. But I think the way that we want to understand it within, our research, and to link it to something that can be interpreted and adapted as it moves from one generation to a next, but has ties to faith, spiritual dimension of life, is really clearly important, because when we go moving on to look at Christian education, I think that's critical. So I'm just going to share with you a slide that I just slipped into this morning, which is our definition that we've been working on for our toddler project about what does it mean to be spiritual flourishing? What does it mean to be spiritual? What does it mean to understand, if we're talking about such a woolly term, wishy-washy term as spiritual, what do we mean within a Christian context? And this links into what we're talking about, spiritual capital. It is that sort of spiritual idea of nurturing the right relationship with self, others, creation, and the transcendent. But it's rooted in the gospel. It's rooted in the idea of having the potential to live life to the full. And I think the way we're using spiritual capital is not that it's untied, unlinked from religion, from faith, but it has those links. But those links might be in some cases quite tenuous, but they are still there. And I think that's really important, that we nurture the links as they are. So what we're going to move on to do, and I realise, Anne, I've spoken far too long, is to accept that there's an urgent need to renew this. And the way we've been looking within faith in the Nexus across the thing is that there's a need for both a practical response to develop on nurturing school leaders and teachers, but there's also a need, as we would always argue, for research. Where is this spiritual capital in decline, and where critically is there evidence of its renewal? So we've looked within faith in the Nexus, areas we've looked at school leadership, we've looked at pupil leadership, we've looked at wider Christian community, encouraging local churches to take part, supporting parachurch organisations. And one of the key areas that's come back to us again and again, which Pete's going to now talk about, is how do we support staff in school who have none or little previous experience of faith, institutional church, or working within a church school, and they're now working within a church school and looking to support the Christian ethos, but to go a little bit further than that. How can we support and nurture that? So thank you, Anne. You're going to have to take control now.
Yeah. So recently I visited 2 church primary schools who very kindly invited me to trial our new Nexus CPD toolkit with staff. And this toolkit focuses on how church schools can engage students and families in faith conversations. And it also offers some practical ideas for staff to consider in their everyday practice. I'll show the toolkit or aspects of the toolkit in a moment. However, when I went into these schools, just talking to the staff, where incidentally, many were either non-practicing Christians or actually non-Christian, they were eager to discuss openly how they personally felt inadequate or unsure about engaging with parents and children on faith or spiritual matters. and it became very clear very quickly that in order to support parents and children, some staff needed supporting themselves. They were respectful of the ethos of their school, but quite a few felt they had little or nothing to contribute to their school community in terms of nurturing the faith and spirituality of those in their care. For them, their spiritual capital reservoirs were either non-existent, empty, or running dry. Some of their comments throughout the day gave us an insight of their perceptions. Comments such as, "Please show me what to do. How do I deliver on this to children that I teach? It all sounds very good, but I have so much to do with teaching the curriculum. How do I fit this type of learning into the day? Can we do this as a cross-curricular exercise with RE?" I think you get the idea. Some staff were seeing spirituality or faith nurturing within their school as an added extra. The most common comment was, "I just haven't got the confidence to do this. I simply do not have the language." It may help at this point if I show you some of the selected slides from the CPD toolkit that we trialled. Now, this isn't the full toolkit and it hasn't got all of the resources on it. The full resource equates to about half a day's CPD divided into 2 main sessions, as highlighted on this slide here. The first session focuses on the Nexus research and establishing a common language where faith and spiritual conversations can flourish. Then the second session offers more practical ideas of witnessing and encouraging spiritual moments in daily life and practice. Staff were introduced to an overview of the faith in the Nexus and the key findings, just to give them some context. So we actually went through these bullet points, but I won't be doing that today because this isn't what we're focusing on today. But we spent a little bit of time getting it into context and establishing it and rooting it within the Nexus research. The staff were then given time to work in small groups discussing the terms religion, spirituality and faith. What did each term mean to them? What did the terms mean in relation to their school contexts? How do the terms relate to each other? And how are they distinct in meaning? Now, we spent quite a bit on this session and it gave rise to some very interesting discussion. And actually, many were surprised to find out that by virtue of our human nature, we are all spiritual beings, even if we personally do not identify with or are affiliated to a particular religion. For some, spirituality and religion always go hand in hand. But after unpacking these ideas around this language and bringing collective ideas of how these terms may manifest in their school context, it immediately brought about a sense of confidence for discussing and raising these questions within the session. To start to address some of the staff questions and concerns I mentioned a moment ago, we took the school mission or vision statement and started to break it down as to what it means within the framework of their school's expectations. So what does it mean for them personally? And if there were certain sections of the mission or vision statement that didn't directly resonate with them personally, what might it mean for others personally in their community? What does it look like for them as a professional? What does it mean for them in relation to others? They took each section of their school vision or mission statement and either worked independently or together. So taking one school's mission statement, to love God, self and others as an example, to love God, what does that look like from their perspective, personally and professionally? How does it manifest itself in daily practice? What does it look like in relation to others? For some staff, God doesn't factor in their life. So in terms of respecting the school ethos, what does it mean for their community to love God? What does that look like? To love self. From staff, there was mention of work-life balance, looking at positives of their day rather than focusing on the negatives. They also mentioned about reaching their potential in their career and their personal life. All of this came under the umbrella of love in self. Then lastly, what does it look like to love others, colleagues, pupils, parents, visitors to the school, especially in times of conflict and challenge, when they're faced with the unreasonable parents, when a child's behaviour is persistently challenged or challenging, when colleagues do not see eye to eye. What does that mission or vision statement mean then? How is it put into practice? Once they started to unpack this, responses generally coming from the staff seemed to change from what they were saying earlier and amounted to, this is so simple. It is just being mindful of what we are doing already. It is keeping the mission or vision in the forefront of our minds in all we do in school. And it isn't necessarily about religion and religious practices. It's about being human and having spiritual awareness. We kept the initial understanding of nurturing spiritual capital amongst the staff as an exercise in living out the mission or distinctive Christian vision of the school, and ways that they might do this throughout the day. It also gave them a kind of anchor and reference to see their practice with a different lens rather than an added lens, if they just kept that vision or mission statement in their mind throughout the day. As part of the toolkit, we felt it important to offer staff ideas and takeaways for how to engage with students and parents in a way that encourages spiritual nurturing. So this section was included in the second session of the CPD toolkit, and with the help of Charlotte Nobbs from Peterborough Diocese, we have been able to offer these ideas. Now, again, I'm only showing you some of what has been produced, and at this moment, I just want to take the opportunity to thank Charlotte for her incredible work on this. So, treasured, not measured, encourages teachers to notice those little moments during the day that children engage in or with positive moments of discovery, excitement, interest, awe and wonder. And it encourages staff to highlight them, to give them time, to give space for the children to actually express these moments and talk about them in the busy day. Also, moments of challenge, like friendship fallouts. Again, it enables a learning moment by teachers or staff generally guiding the children and reminding them of the school values and what this value may look like in times of conflict, giving them real-time examples of values in action. All of these experiences are learning moments or spiritual moments and should be treasured, even if they're not measured. The next thing that Charlotte actually spoke about was questions of the month. These provide opportunities to search the big questions, such as, is there a God? What happens after death? Is there a life after death? And it supports the idea of teachers not getting hung up about trying to provide an answer necessarily. Our spiritual journey is a journey of search and discovery. Different responses given by others can be opportunities to learn and can easily involve the family or local church or parish community. In fact, one of the schools we worked with are now taking a question of the month raised by children, posting it on their website and inviting responses from families, their local church community and school governors. They then take the responses to the children so that the children can discuss them and look at the various responses that are given to the questions that they pose. Box of stars. This establishes a system to affirm children each week or each term. The school contacts the family with the values they are focusing on within the school, and the family is given a supply of stars. So if the value is seen in action either in home or in the school, it is written on a star and displayed in the classroom for them to be celebrated with the children. In fact, at the end of the day, parents could also be invited in to celebrate with the children about their whole array of stars that are up in the classroom, even if it's just for 10 minutes. We've produced the CPD toolkit with full script for the Church of England school settings and for Catholic school settings. So the content is essentially the same, but the language may differ. for each context. The resources we've created are for general use. However, they would need adapting for your particular school context. So should you wish to have them, we wouldn't send them across in PDF format. We'll send them across as they are so that you can adapt them. And should you wish to have either of the resources sent across to you, please email nexus@canterbury.co.uk